As you know, I'm David Witten, and I'm the coordinator of keyboard studies here at the J.Cali School of Music. And Mr. Hautzig, we're very honored that you've agreed to be distinguished guest faculty here at the J.Cali School this year. And you've just completed the fourth class, the fourth master class with our piano students, and they're getting a lot out of it, and I hope you are too.
A lot, and I enjoy it tremendously. After all, this is our future, you know.
It's our past, present, and future.
Yes, absolutely.
And there's important traditions going on that go back even older than
Yes,
than you.
yeah, I mean, I go back a way, and I have had teachers, you know, who knew Brahms and Bruckner, and that's generations
Yeah.
back.
In fact, those early teachers and the early generations is what I wanted to ask you about. You've written this very fine book, Playing Around the
Yes.
World, and it's a great summary, and it highlights some of the most interesting stories of your life and career. And the early training, of course, in Vienna, you mentioned two particular teachers, and of course you didn't have the opportunity to continue with them, but I have the feeling that they were very important in those very early years when you were young.
You probably mean Max Graf.
Max Graf.
You know who was, well, Max Graf, you see, he had to escape from the Nazis, as I did, and he lived in New York for a while, where his son was a stage director at the Metropolitan Opera, Herbert Graf. And he was used to spend his evenings in the coffee houses in Vienna.
I mean Max, before he left Vienna.
Yes. So when he came to New York, he couldn't find a coffee house. He found one doesn't exist anymore, called the Eclair on 72nd Street, and he was there almost every evening, sitting alone, having a coffee, and I used to come and sit with him, and got information that was fantastic, you know. He was a friend of Richard Strauss. He was the pupil of, he knew Brahms. Brahms told him he must go, when he was a young student, he must study counterpoint. He said, where? He says, go to the countryside and find an old church organist. And I did, and his name was Anton Bruckner. That was his teacher, you see.
So Max Graf took the advice
of Brahms and
and
went and studied with Bruckner.
found old Bruckner,
yeah,
and studied counterpoint.
Studied counterpoint with him. So that was fantastic. And for instance, he was very friendly with Richard Strauss. Richard Strauss met Hindemith. And he said to him, I don't understand why you write atonal music. After all, you don't have to do that. After all, you have talent. Wonderful thing, you see.
A lot of implications in that.
No,
yeah.
well, of course, a lot. And then Richard Strauss was at one time the head of the Nazi music chamber, whatever they called it, Generalmusikraum and so on. But Richard Strauss had two Jewish grandchildren whom Hitler protected. Hitler left orders, nothing is to happen to them. I mean,
Richard or Johann?
Richard's son married a Jewish woman. And their children, according to Jewish law, were Jews. And you know what Hitler did to the Jews. So he left orders that Richard Strauss's two grandchildren should not be bothered. Wasn't that generous of him? You know? And at the end of the war, when Richard Strauss came to America, and he was welcomed with open arms, unlike the Hungarian Dohnányi, who was a Nazi sympathizer. So he was not welcomed in Carnegie Hall. He went to Florida and became a professor at the State University in Tallahassee. That was Dohnányi, you see. And
But getting back to Max Graf, who was one of your earliest teachers.
oh yes, he was my teacher.
He was your piano teacher.
No, he was my teacher in music history
Okay.
at the Vienna Academy.
So you were about, how old were you then?
14. You see, in Vienna, you could go to the academy, which had college status, but you could go there earlier. So while I went to high school, I was at the academy, and there were many times classes at the same time. And guess where I went? Of course I went to the academy. This is why I was such a lousy student in high school, because I many times didn't attend the classes, and the professors didn't like it.
Right. And so who was your piano teacher when you were that young?
My first piano teacher was some inconsequential woman, but then I studied 1 year with Otto Schulhoff, who was very well known. He played with Casals, he played with Kreisler. I mean, he was a very good collaborator to these. And I remember when I met Casals years later in Marlborough, and I told him, you're an alumna of Otto Schulhoff, I'm a student of Otto Schulhoff. Oh, he said, he was my pianist, and he was a musician. And do you know, I am the godfather of his son. It was very touching, you know.
So they really.
Then he asked me, so how is he? I had to say, I'm sorry, he's dead. He's not alive anymore. And who knows what would have happened to him if he had lived longer.
Was this Schulhoff the same name as Erwin Schulhoff,
No,
the composer?
no,
It's
no.
unrelated.
Otto Schulhoff was one of the most respected pianists in Vienna, you see. But what happened to him in the war, I don't know whether he was arrested, because he was not an Aryan. You see, in those days, my main teacher at the academy was a woman called Grete Hinterhofer, a wonderful, fine person. The only member of the faculty who never joined the Nazi party. And she was very decent. And she is the teacher of a very fine American artist, Malcolm Bilson.
Oh, sure.
Studied with her. How did I know? I was a soloist at the first Gilmore Festival. You've heard of the Gilmore Festival.
Gilmore.
And after the concert, Malcolm Bilson comes backstage. And he said, now I understand. I said, what? Because I studied with Hinterhofer, and all she ever talked about was you. Now I know why.
Oh.
Which was very nice, and we became good friends.
Oh, you had never met Malcolm Bilson before?
Never
then?
before.
And you both had the same teacher when you were teenagers?
No, he was there after the war.
Oh, yeah.
He's much younger than I.
Yeah.
You see, I left Vienna. I ran away from the Nazis when I was 16.
Mhm.
You see, Hinterhofer, I had to escape. I had to flee for my life, you know.
Yeah.
And it was an amazing story. You've heard of the famous Budapest Quartet.
The string quartet, sure.
The founder of the Budapest Quartet saved my life.
One of the Schneiders?
No. His name was Emil Hauser. He was the first violinist, and in 1932 he left the quartet and went to what then was Palestine and founded the Jerusalem Conservatory in a furnished room with one upright piano.
1932.
Today it is the Academy of Music in Jerusalem with 1,600 students, an opera company, a symphony orchestra. And you've heard that symphony orchestra.
Yeah, I was
I
there last
recorded The Emperor with them.
Mhm.
There's a student orchestra.
They play like professionals.
They were wonderful, they're wonderful. So when the Nazis came to power, the British severely restricted Jewish immigration. Hauser became very friendly with the High Commissioner, the British High Commissioner of Palestine, which at that time was a British colony, and persuaded him to give him 60 certificates of immigration, which were supposed to go to Aryans to bring young Jewish musicians to Palestine. He went into the hell. He went into
Came back
Nazi.
into Vienna.
He came to Vienna as a British citizen, but believe me, if anything would have happened to him, England would not have declared war, and held auditions. I was at 8 o'clock in the morning at his hotel. He came at 2. And he says, I'm terribly sorry, but I have to go. I have an appointment. And being shy as I am, I jumped into the taxi before him, and I said, I'm going with you.
Mhm.
He took me to an apartment. He didn't introduce me, he just said, Spiel,
Play.
play. And I remember I played the Waldstein Sonata and the G minor ballad. And he said, I will bring you to Jerusalem. And 4 weeks later I was there. It was a miracle, because when the Kristallnacht came, they came looking for me, the Gestapo, and I was gone. So I lived at the age of 16 in Jerusalem alone, with 10 German marks in my pocket. But
Did Emil Hauser keep going back more often to Vienna?
no,
That was just that one trip?
the one trip.
Wow.
He brought on the same boat the composer Starrer,
Robert Starr.
was on the same ship with me, and the Grünberg brothers, one of whom became the concertmaster of the BBC Symphony, the other one became the violist of the Allegri Quartet in England, and it was an amazing thing.
Did he really bring 60? You said he had 60.
Yeah, oh yeah.
So he
yeah,
brought 60 musicians back.
Different. and so that was that. And another miracle happened at the end of the war. I went on my first tour to Europe, and I was asked by the Norwegian government to participate in a benefit concert for the Norwegian Nazi victims.
This is some years later, 1947, right?
47. And the King of Norway was supposed to come to the concert. But in the last minute, the King of Norway, who was the younger brother of the King of Denmark, the King of Denmark died. So the Norwegian court was in mourning, and I was told by the American embassy that the king, King Haakon VII, will invite all the artists the day after the concert for an audience in the royal palace. I had already booked a ship from Norway to leave immediately after the concert. But I wasn't going to miss meeting the king. So I booked it. I changed the booking and went on a Swedish ship, the Drottningholm. And the Norwegian government very kindly offered me an aeroplane, which was to fly me to Gothenburg, where the ship was waiting. And on that ship I met my wife.
You met the 16-year-old
She was 16, had just come from Siberia, where she was a prisoner during the war. So I had to tell my children, if it hadn't been for the King of Denmark, you wouldn't be here. You know, but it's quite a story. And it was a wonderful experience, that concert, my God. The other artists were famous actors. The great Swedish tenor Seth Svanholm. I was at his debut in Vienna as a student. I never would have dreamt that I would join with him in a concert, you see. And and Anne Brown was there. Anne Brown, you don't know who Anne Brown is. She was the original Bess.
Oh, the Porgy and Bess?
The original Bess. She wanted to come to the Peabody, my school. They wouldn't take her because she was black. So she went to Juilliard. They arranged an audition with Gershwin. And Gershwin, she was 19, offered her the role of Bess in the premiere of Porgy and Bess. And of course, we became great friends. She lived in Norway. She was married. Her third husband was a Norwegian Olympic ski jumper. And the marriage didn't last, but she stayed in Norway. And I was invited to her 90th birthday by the American ambassador. Unfortunately, I was unable to go, but we were in touch. She died a few years ago at the age of 95.
Well, the connections and the people you've met are extraordinary, and it seems like an endless web of interesting people.
I mean that was so wonderful, and you see, my wife was a prisoner in Siberia, and that saved her life, because the rest of the family were all murdered by the Germans.
Yeah.
Every one of them, and except all her cousins, aunts, uncles, and so on.
Because the Soviets arrived in Vilnius 10 months before the Nazis.
Oh yes.
And the Soviets took her,
The Soviets took her
to Siberia.
Took her to Siberia. And she has written a major, her book, that's nothing. Her book sold over 1 million copies.
And it's been translated into more than 30 languages.
And I think 37 languages. You know, and so
But
that's,
let's just back up a moment. You were in Jerusalem, and then you had suddenly an opportunity.
then in the meantime, my my mother got to America. My father was still in Vienna, and I could not contact him.
Because the war had just started. So
He was in German territory, I was in British territory. My sister was in New York already, and my mother. And I was 18, they wanted the family to be together. So they arranged for me to send me the necessary papers, sent me a ship ticket, and when I arrived in New York, my father was waiting for me at the ship. He had gotten there 5 weeks earlier. He got out. It's a miracle that he got out, because his two sisters, you know, didn't make it, and his brother didn't make it, you know, and they were all killed. My wife's family, don't ask. Every one of them. Siberia saved her life. It almost killed her, but it saved her life. And I remember the first question I had for her on the ship. How was it in Siberia? She says, better than a concentration camp. Yeah. You see,
So you didn't know your dad had escaped until you actually arrived at New York Harbor.
I had no way
and there he was waiting
Yeah,
at
he
the
was
pier.
waiting.
What a day that must have been. So then you wanted to get back to piano study.
No, then I wanted to get back to the piano study, and had a very, very difficult decision to make. Schnabel offered to teach me.
The legendary Arthur Schnabel.
But I got a scholarship, and I was accepted by the Curtis. And I felt Schnabel was so much on tour that I would have probably seen him twice every half a year. And in the meantime, I would have had lessons with his son, Karl Ulrich, who was not the greatest pianist. And I felt I needed the discipline of a school, of a structure. And Curtis was the #1 school in the world, probably. Maybe next to the Moscow Conservatory, I don't know, but
So the idea that you needed
yes, I felt,
was
and Schnabel never held it against me, and gave
Right.
me lessons.
you stayed in touch, and you
In
would see him
touch, and I
sometimes.
played for him many, many times.
Mhm.
You see, he never held it against me.
So in the end, you got the best of both.
I did, yes.
Were your parents influential in deciding, making that decision?
No, my parents left it up to me.
So then, tell us about your actual audition at Curtis.
Oh, that was very nice. At Curtis,
You took the bus down.
I took a bus
New
to
York.
Philadelphia. Yes, and I played the audition. After the audition, we were all waiting in the lobby. The faculty comes down, and suddenly Serkin left them, walked over and shakes my hand and said, I liked it very much. And that's all.
He said in German.
In German, hat mir ausgezeichnet gefallen. And I figured he would take me as a student. Thank God he didn't. It would have been, his son told me, when I asked Schnabel's son, did you study with your father? He says it would have been murder and homicide. But with Serkin it would have been the same. Serkin, you know, if you take one note from the left hand in the right hand, he wouldn't have it. You see, thank God I didn't. The next thing I knew is they came to me and said, they like you very much. They want you to play tomorrow in the finals. Finals. I had enough bus fare to go home. How what? But luckily, the brother of a close friend in Jerusalem was a professor at the University of Pennsylvania. And I had an introduction to him. And when they heard that I'm in the finals, but he says, I don't know what to do. No, don't worry, you'll stay with us. They invited me. And it was, I've never forgotten that, you know. And the next day was the finals. And many years later, Serkin said to me, would you like to know what the faculty thought about your performance? He said, Vengerova was against you. She was a famous Russian tyrant of a teacher of Gary Grafman.
And Bernstein.
And Lenny Bernstein, yeah, with whom
she
fought all the time. They had fights all the time. And was against you. She said, you go too much your own way. And I said, that's exactly why we want him. And they assigned me to a marvelous pianist, a pupil of Joseph Hoffman, whose name was Harry Kaufman. Marvelous pianist. He was a cembalist, accompanist, and so on. And I was 1 year with him. And then Munz came. And he left the Curtis.
Who, Kaufman left?
Yes, and I had to audition again.
For months.
For everybody. And Munz immediately came over to me and said, okay, what would you like to study over the summer? How about the Rachmaninoff Rhapsody? So there was never any question, and then he and I had a wonderful relationship.
And he never minded borrowing from the other hand and rearranging.
Oh, no.
He taught you all the tricks, right?
Look, the Joseph Hoffman, who was in many opinions one of the greatest pianists who ever lived. Hoffman studied with Anton Rubinstein. And Anton Rubinstein said, play it with your nose as long as it sounds good. And that has always been my idea of studying and what I told my students.
And once, what would you say his greatest contribution was for learning how to practice?
Oh, yes.
He knew how to...
He sat down with me and took every passage apart and showed me. And when I would argue with him, he said, but Busoni did it like that. And when he said that, I didn't say another word. Because he was a pupil of Busoni, one of the greatest pianists who ever lived. And he spoke to me German. Der Busoni hat es so gemacht. Busoni did it like that. Then I shut up.
But Munz knew all kinds of methods of practicing and timing and rhythms.
Oh yes, he had to practice in different rhythms and with doublings and this and it worked. It worked wonderful.
His early recordings when he could still play.
Oh, you have it.
Yes.
I mean, he was an incredible pianist. And Rachmaninoff said to him once, go away. Everybody says you play my Rhapsody better than I.
And was Muntz also inspiring as far as a career? Did he open some doors?
Yes. He got me my first tour to Europe. And he was instrumental in getting me my first tour to Japan. Then I had to make it on my own. But he wrote to the manager in Sweden, and as a result I played in Sweden, Norway, and Denmark, and in Finland.
Many times.
Many, of course, many times. He was a tremendous help. Musically, the most inspiring was Schnabel. I mean, Schnabel gave me musical ideas that nobody else could have given me. Pianistically, he couldn't care less.
He couldn't care, or he just trusted that you would figure it out?
No, he didn't bother with it.
When you look at Schnabel's editions, the fingerings are...
I can't say.
He had a hand made of rubber or something.
No, the fingerings, I never paid attention to his fingerings.
But, so when you did work with Schnabel,
Only,
what
only
did he talk
musically,
about?
only
Phrasing and timing?
musically, yeah.
But what in particular, like the timing of a passage or the architecture of the piece? Or
It's hard to say. It's
did he speak in metaphors or?
I studied with him Opus 111, I studied with him the Mozart Adagio, I studied with him Mozart, the Rondo in A minor, the A-flat Ballade. I didn't always do what he said. I many times disagreed with him, but that was fine. He was very inspiring, very inspiring.
Did he actually talk a lot? Was he, or
Oh, yes.
demonstrate a lot?
Oh,
Which
yes, he
one?
demonstrated a lot. Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Oh, yes, he was. I am very, very grateful that I had those sessions with him.
Yeah, the people who have studied with him like can't say enough about
No,
it.
I know. I mean, he told me things which took 10, 20 years to understand. Then when I understood them, you know.
There's one or two books of collections that he wrote.
Yes.
Do you find those just a mere shadow of what he was like, or does it seem to agree with?
If you had the good fortune to work with him, you can't compare. Like, what's his name? The chief critic of the New York Times.
Schoenberg?
No,
Tomasini?
Tomasini. Tomasini wrote about Schnabel once. And what he said was nonsense. So I wrote him a letter and said, I had lessons with Schnabel and such happened. You know what his answer was? I never met Schnabel, but my teacher, Leonard Schur, told me that. That's all. I didn't argue with him, and that's it. But Schnabel told me things. He would say, you have to diminish the long notes, and you have to add to the short values. And I would say, well, a quarter is a quarter, and you know, later on I understood. You know, when it came to that, all I had to do was listen to his recordings. Oh yes, it was a great adventure. His lessons lasted 3 hours. And he was known not to start the lesson until the money was in the piano.
Cool.
I never paid him 1 cent. First of all, I didn't have it, and second of all, he never asked for it. Yes, and when his son came to see me, I showed him the picture that he gave me, and in it he wrote, "To Walter Hautzig in good comradeship."
So he felt very connected to
I
you.
value this.
Sure.
Yeah.
Felt very connected.
Oh yeah, it was wonderful. So I mean, I don't need Mr. Tomasini to tell me,
No.
but it's all right.
So the two big giants in your training, not
Schnabel
only training,
and
but
Munz.
your musical
Schnabel and
guidance.
Munz.
Schnabel and Munz.
Yeah, I mean, the other Hinterhofer was very good, and Harry Kaufmann was very good, but Schnabel and Munz were
Yeah.
the two major ones.
Great.
And then many things I learned on my own.
And from your students, I imagine.
Well, of course, very much from my students. And I mean, they're all over the world, my students. They're in Japan, and in Korea, and in
In Texas and Virginia and South Carolina and North Carolina
yeah.
and Maryland
Yeah.
and New Jersey.
Yeah.
Well,
Yes.
we're very fortunate to have you working with these your grand students.
Yes, my grandchildren. Yeah. No, yeah, it's wonderful. It's wonderful. And when you were at my 90th birthday,
Yes, I was at your 80th and your 90th.
Yeah, well, the students came, there were students who came from Japan, from Norway, from Spain, from all over the world.
And also we had the honor of having the King of Tonga,
And the King of Tonga,
the South Sea island not far from Fiji, New Zealand.
and on his way home he died. After I arranged for him, he was a great friend of Israel. And he went to see Ilan Shul and to engage Israeli musicians for the music school he was building in Tonga. And on his way home, he became ill in Hong Kong and died. You know.
Yeah, it's a great loss. It was about to be a flourishing connection between
Yes.
Tonga and
Yeah,
Israel, actually.
Yeah, and no, he was such a fine human being. Tonga, I mean, you never heard of most. Tonga was an absolute monarchy. You see, he made it a constitutional monarchy. The minute he was crowned, he and gave all the rights to the parliament. He was a marvelous man, and his lady still. He fell in love with a woman, and his father told him he cannot marry her. She would never be queen. She was not blue-blooded.
She was not of the noble family of Tonga.
So he refused to marry. They were together 32 years. And she's a dear friend of mine. She came to the concert with him. And he made his brother the crown prince. His brother is now the king. And she told me that she finally met his mother. She had never been introduced.
Oh, all those years she never met the mother.
So the mother came, and I said, so how was it? She says, all she did is hang on to me and cry. She lost her first son, you know. And never heard of Tonga, you know, but it was so interesting that the king, the late king, I mean his father, told me about his visit to Gaddafi. That Gaddafi offered him $1 million, which for a tiny country with 100,000 people is a lot of money. And at the last dinner, he said, of course, you don't have relations with Israel. And he said, oh yes, we do. But why? He said, after all, it's the land of Jesus. And there is more good in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, that if the world would only observe it, there would never be any need for war. And that was the end of my interview and the end of the $1 million. Yeah. Yeah, he was a charming man, the old king. And in the United Nations, there were many votes where Israel got 2 votes, the United States and Tonga. Yeah. It was an interesting, I mean, to think of the king coming all the way, Tonga is near New Zealand, to come all the way to New York to hear me play the piano for 1 hour.
It's quite an honor.
Yeah, well, the last message I had was that he was invited to the royal wedding of the, you know, of what's his name, of you know,
Prince Charles' son.
Son Charles' son, and that he has to go to London and he will stop in New York and visit me. And of course, it never came to it. Yeah.
Okay.
So
Well, the journey continues.
the journey. Look at this. I have a job now. I'm gainfully employed.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. And
I have one question.
yes.
Do you have a photographic memory?
Of whom?
A photographic memory.
I don't know. I guess I have a good memory. I couldn't remember all the programs I have played. You know. The trouble is, as I said, my eyesight is very bad now. But I don't need. I can play the Brahms concerto tomorrow. You know, it's fine. I'm very grateful to do. I love being here with the young kids.
Well, the students are getting a lot out of it.
Do they?
From
I'm glad.
your musical suggestions to the stories,
Yeah, well,
the whole package.
well, you know, it's been very exciting. I'm playing a few concerts yet, and were you at Lincoln Center when I played? That wasn't bad.
Oh, the Bach Arioso was to die for. That slow
Pardon?
movement of the slow movement in the Bach concerto was just, you could hear a pin drop.
Yeah,
Straight
I know,
from
it was
heaven.
okay. Yeah, I'm still able to play. I'm not playing much. I play very little, but I'm able to do it, and as long as I can, as long as I do it well. The minute I'm playing now a new program. I'm playing the C major rondo of Beethoven, the Moonlight Sonata, the German dances of Schubert, and a hell of a lot of Chopin with the Andante Spianato.
Great. Well, thank you for playing this afternoon for the
Oh,
students,
that was
the nocturne and several
you,
waltzes.
you haven't gotten the bill yet.
Oh, well, we'll save up for it. Well, thank you so much.
Well, I'm so thrilled that you have my book. It's nice.
Of
yeah.
course, the book is also in our library, and also the book that Lynn Rice-See wrote,
Which is a nice book.
the 613 examples
Yeah.
with great descriptions of your teaching.
Did you know of the 613 numbers by accident?
It's a coincidence. It
It's a
refers,
coincidence.
yeah, because the Mishnah says that
The
the Bible has 613 commandments,
Yes.
some positive, some negative, but
Yeah.
the total number is 613. And just by nice coincidence,
Yeah.
Lynn Rice-See came up with 613
Yes.
illustrations
It's a
of
good
your
book.
teaching.
I learned from it.
Good. Good. Well, thanks very much.
Well, thank you. This is. Will I be able to see this?
Yes.